Why do you want them to listen to your podcast?
So that when they think about starting a business, they've got the content that is pointing them in the right direction.
That is such a valuable piece of advice there.
The change in mindset makes a massive difference.
Welcome to Aussie Lawn Stars.
Welcome to the dungeon, Kim. How are you?
Thanks. Yeah, great, Gary. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Now, I think it's probably at least 2 weeks since I first came across your name, is it?
Probably a little longer than that, yes.
But our mutual friend Leighton recommended I should interview you.
Yes.
And I was like, awesome. I need to do more podcasts on employing and how to handle employees successfully. So last week I had Clint Adams from WaterPro. He runs a couple of businesses and he talks about a lot of business topics. But I asked him, I said, okay, help me understand why so many lawn care business is almost the wrong word, can't get past that first stage of putting on an employee. They grow, put on an employee, and then they shrink again. So the last week's episode was all about why people can't get their mindset shift over to being managers instead of just being self-employed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you fill in the listeners here? Your background is HR, correct?
It is, yeah. It goes a little bit further back than that. I was in sports science for a little bit, but decided to take the leap into human resources. So I've been doing this for 25 plus years in fairly large organisations in construction and mining across Australia, but for the last 9 years, I've had my own business. So I've been able to apply all of the great stuff that I've learned within those large organisations to small business as well. And then obviously you've got to tailor it, right? You've got to go, well, what do small businesses need that is quite different to what a large organisation does?
Yeah, and that gets very different.
Very, very, very different. Yeah, very different. But yeah, I've been supporting small businesses now. I still work for large organisations as well, but love working for small businesses.
So when you say you work for small businesses, are you seeing a lot of startups where they don't have any employees and guiding them through the stages like that? Yeah. Do you do a lot more work with people who are already employing and helping them get their culture right?
Typically, people will call me when they've already got employees on board and they're now having problems.
Fix my problems, please, Kim.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I have one employer that I work for that calls it the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And I don't like being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I prefer to get involved earlier on so the ambulance is not needed. So you set up well.
We've got an hour, it's up to 3 hours right now, where you get to be the parachute at the top of the cliff instead.
Yeah, awesome. I much prefer to do that.
And if we hit 3 hours, you're going to curse me because, that you've got other things to do.
Yeah, and then we will need an ambulance.
Well, I would love to hear what you can tell my listeners.
Sure.
And I would say a large percentage of my listeners, I've been in business for 15 years, but at the start of the business, self-employed is how you describe it. Not business, but self-employed. So I've bought myself a job and then all of a sudden, I've got busy and I'll put somebody on. And you're not so much going to talk about the numbers side of it, but my first experience was when I paid an employee $20 an hour 15 years ago, and I realized for every hour they worked, I wasn't making money. So see you later.
Yeah.
And had to rethink that side of it. But if we look at it from that stage of people who are simply outgrowing their self-employed model through to people who want to have large businesses or small businesses that have multiple employees might be the better way to say that.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing that I'd always recommend is, think about who you want to engage in your business. So a lot of the time it's about hiring for attitude rather than training for skill. So what I guess I mean by that is while technical skills can be taught, qualities like teamwork, adaptability, and a strong work ethic, they're the kind of things I think that are ingrained within an employee's character or a person's character. So it's about getting an employee on board with the right mindset to contribute to that real positive work environment that you're trying to establish for your business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's countercultural for a lot of people who are self-employed because their skills is what makes them money.
Absolutely. And look, some, depending on, the specific area of the business, it could be that they might need someone with a certificate in horticulture or whatever the case may be, right? So they'll still want to have a look for certain skills that the person has, but oftentimes a person might just not have the experience that someone wants. And I'd always recommend that they have a look at the attitude first, because if you've got that attitude, you can get the person the experience. You can train them on the job. So,
yes.
If you need, someone that's can help with mowing, weeding, basic landscaping, instead of just looking for someone with experience, really focus on hiring someone who's reliable, who's punctual, hardworking. They like physical outdoor activity. They're friendly, they're professional when dealing with the customers. So you look at those kind of things rather than the skill sets around, what equipment have they used before and how much experience have they got in lawn care, for instance.
Yeah, and I think that should be the way people look at it, because most of the time, if they do need a certificate, that can be acquired down the track, or it can
Absolutely.
be a way of offering a new employee an incentive. Let's get you started, and then once you've shown that your attitude's right, we'll start training you up through TAFE and either an apprenticeship or a certification.
Yeah, spot on. And look, I think in terms of, how to actually apply that concept of hire for attitude, train for skill, is that you absolutely do want to have a great conversation with an employee before you kind of bring them on board. I see so many times with small businesses that it's, they were referred to me, or, look, I heard that they were looking for a job and I just got them started. Whereas I always say, look, it doesn't need to be a formal interview. It might seem a bit bizarre to you to do that, but definitely have a conversation. Take them for a coffee, ask some questions, you might even just ask some basic questions about, hey, tell me a time where you've worked, outdoors or in tough conditions. How did you handle it? Or tell me a time when a job was harder and it took longer than expected. What did you do? And it's about just asking how they manage in certain circumstances so that you can start to understand a little bit about their mindset and about their work ethic.
Yeah, and I think that's a trap too when people, and I did this, first employee, is it somebody I know already? Then shake hands, let's go.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do what Clint Adams was talking about last week, his first employee was through Seek, which means he had to start thinking about what is it I'm looking for in an employee? What's the job listing going to have in the job listing? And what you're saying is in the job listing or in the informal interview, whichever way you go, it's not just the can you cut grass, can you cut a straight edge, can you weed and hedge trim. It's no, let's talk about character and attitude.
Absolutely. And look, you might even want to offer a paid trial shift to see how they work on site first, rather than, automatically go to, hey, I want you to start on Monday. It's a permanent gig. Away we go. It could be a, hey, look, why don't you come and give it a go to see if it's right for you, and we can actually check you out and see, if you're going to be the right fit for us as well. And there's no harm in doing that whatsoever. Yeah.
Can we make up a statistic here?
Can we make up a statistic?
Yeah. Yeah, I love giving false numbers. It's just one of the things I do in my podcast all the time. So if you were to put a number on it and we go, okay, my way of dealing with this is I employ the first person I talk to, whereas your way of dealing with this would be to go, okay, out of a set of applicants, I expect a small percentage of those applicants to be suitable for the job. So I've heard somebody else talk about this in terms of going, okay, get 500 people applying for a job. That might be a little bit out there, but just as a number, 500 people apply for a job. out of that 500, there might be 20 people that actually fill out the application in a way that looks interesting. You get those 20 people into your first stage, and then you filter it through 5-6 stages of filtering till you go, okay, you can do a trial day. And then out of the trial day, you might go, okay, there was 3 people did the trial day, and one of them's the successful applicant. So can we make a number up? What's the percentage of people you should reject in order to find the right person? And I know it's not always going to be that way.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. Look, I think it is also, look, I like what you said then before I give you a percentage. I like what you said there about putting them through, certain stages, because I think that that's right. Quite often we don't set the time aside to really go through the process. So you're right. Understand what it is you're looking for up front so that you've got your criteria, you've got your benchmark, that's your first gateway. You'll then perhaps, have an initial conversation. You'll see how that conversation over the phone went. You then might invite for, a formal interview or a coffee. If that ticks the box, then you might do some reference checking. It's not something that a lot of small businesses do, but I'd highly recommend it. And that is simply just, hey, give me 1 or 2 people I can talk to. And quite often that reference checking is, the individual's going to give you a good referee anyway, right? They're not going to give you a number of someone that's going to bag them out or say that they weren't good. But what you can often do is ask questions around, hey, tell me what this person was like to work with and what were the ways that you had to adapt so that they worked well, when they worked for you. But look, percentage-wise, oh, goodness, that's a really tricky one, Gary. I would actually say you're probably at about 10% of all of the applicants that apply. But I think it's also because you get so many people that apply that you just go, wow, this is not for them.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. And I know 500 people applying for a job for Gary Ashton is probably unrealistic. I might get 5 people apply for a job, but if you do have more than 5 people apply for a job, you will find 90% of them are upfront able to be discounted because they didn't fill out the application right, or they didn't turn up for that initial interview in a timely manner. And then after you get rid of those first ones, then you start filtering out which ones are actually interesting.
Yeah. And I think that goes towards my second point that I want to talk about, which is you've got to really set expectations from the get-go. If you start accepting substandard stuff, even at interview stage, that gives a signal to employees that this is the way they run their business and that's okay, and that I can continue doing substandard stuff.
Yeah, and I've struggled with that. I haven't been employing the whole time I've been in business, but I have struggled with that in terms of going, okay, is my employee my friend or do I keep them at a distance?
Yeah.
And having clear expectations, I guess, helps that.
It certainly does.
There can be room for both, right? But
I agree. Yeah.
In business, I think you've got to have the business first, friendship second.
I'd agree, and I think, let's go to that. The setting the clear expectations from day one is just saying that, look, this is what I want for my business. This is what's important to me as an employer. This is what I'm going to hold you to. And so that then if you do end up with a friendship, you can always come back to those written or unwritten rules to go, hey, remember we talked about this up front? Well, they're getting a little bit loose. We need to come back to that. So you can still do that in a way that makes you feel like you still, got some kind of a relationship with that person, but you're still holding them to account. Because you're right, that the friendship has to come second. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard of too many employee situations where the employee will become manipulative because you're my friend. You should let me get away with drinking on the job or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I'm just going to have an early knockoff on Friday. Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think the other thing about it too, though, is that if you're not clear on expectations or standards that you want for your business or your customers, your clients, then it leads to confusion, but it leads to people dipping below the line and performance not being as great as what you'd want. And, you get frustration. If you employ more than one person, you'll get a lot of frustration from the other employees if they're seeing that someone's getting away with standards that have been set. So
yes,
it's important that, to be able to maintain performance across your business and a great culture across your business, that you're absolutely treating everyone and holding them to those same expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen that in my own business where I've had more than one person working with me at any point in time, and I'm starting to think about that, going, okay, yeah, I can see where they start to keep each other in check, or they get annoyed that somebody's getting away with something they wouldn't get away with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've made all the mistakes, trust me.
Well, that's where we learn, right?
Well, this is why I'm talking to you, because I want people listening to this to have a better path of learning.
Yeah, awesome. So let's maybe talk about that from an example perspective, because if I hear a lot of people say, hey, look, I've hired this employee. They were going okay originally, and then their performance has just slumped. They're not showing up on time anymore. They're not putting the equipment away properly. They're cutting corners with the client, that kind of thing. So I think it's really about, making sure that you've got really simple ways of setting your expectations. And a lot of people say, oh, do I have to have a job description? Well, it's great if you do have a written job description, but you might even just create a simple checklist for everyone. And that checklist is just about the standards that we expect, that you arrive on site 10 minutes early, that you ensure all the equipment's cleaned and stored after each job, or, that you communicate with customers politely, or a good one might even be, if you've got more than one worker, that, you help your teammates out, in that you don't just finish your job and you dust off. You actually pitch in and help out so that you can all finish and get a break before going to the next job. So it's really just, it's almost like your little guidebook. It's like, what do you expect? What do you want to hold for your business as clear expectations?
And I think there's a lot of value in having that expectation that's not just about how you cut grass. It's also about how you turn up when you turn up and your professional attitude. Now, on the clock side of it, I've seen with larger companies where employees get rather cranky. They're expected to turn up early and they don't get paid for turning up early.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, are you expected to get paid if you turn up 10 minutes early, or is that just something you're expected to do so that you're ready to start on time?
Yeah, yeah. And to me, this comes back to attitude, right? And that first point that we made is that, my simple expectation is that someone does turn up ready to go. Do we need to be paid to be at a job on time, ready to go? I think that should really be the expectation.
But that's kind of like asking, do I get paid to put my boots on before I leave home? Do I get paid to scrub my teeth and do my hair? I don't very often do my hair. Sorry,
sunscreen and my hat on. Yeah, I mean, it's about being job ready, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a difficult topic in lawn care because we've got lots of complexities around what is the start time for a job. So most people will start from their home, or if they've grown their business enough, they might have a warehouse that they start from.
Yeah.
But if they're starting from their home or their warehouse, their employees meet them there and then they proceed from there to the first job. So I have the fortunate situation where my employee meets me on site, do the job for the day, and then they leave and go home again. So I pay them from turning up on site to when they leave, finish for the day. But most people have got to start going, okay, I pay them from the time they turn up at my home or the warehouse, travel to and from all of the different jobs. And that creates that extra complexity around that. And particularly if one employee is running late and you've got another employee waiting, ready to go on the clock already.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And look, that's the reality. It absolutely is. And I think it is for small businesses, this is this kind of stuff that they do need to think about before they engage that person. They're like, oh, gee, what's my answer if I do get asked these questions? How am I going to manage that? You know, do I want to be paying them? Maybe I do want to be paying them, 10 minutes before the job so that they can get all the right equipment. Do I expect them to pick it up themselves? Do I expect them to pick it up from my place? Yeah.
Well, if they are going to be organising their schedule or loading the truck or whatever it might be, then that's part of the job, so to speak.
Yeah. And look, it's interesting, right? Very different to a lot of office workers, because office workers are paid, it might be a 9 to 5, right? And they don't have to travel between. Whereas a lot of people in the lawn care business, they might do a small job that's a couple of hours and then they'll travel to the next job, and they might expect that a break is had between jobs, not on a job.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the best thing to say here is there's no clear right answer on some of these questions. If you have employees that are doing 8 jobs to 20 jobs in a day, they get a lot of paid breaks because they're traveling, and it might be 1 minute between jobs, it might be half an hour between jobs, sometimes more. But that's a lot of paid breaks that they get. Now, I've heard some employees getting cranky when that's considered a break because they have to be there. They're traveling in between jobs. So they then want to get a break where they're not in the car traveling. They sit down and have lunch somewhere. And it's like, okay, I can understand why they would get cranky if they don't get to sit down and have lunch. They got to eat lunch in the car. There's no opportunity to go find a bathroom in between jobs.
Yeah. It is. It's interesting, isn't it? And look, these are all the things that you can, I'm sure, work through discussions with employees before they start. And look, if you've got more than one person too, it's a great opportunity to schedule so that you just basically say, hey, look, guys, you've got 45 minutes here where you've got to travel between one job and the next. That's just the way it is today, right? That could be an unusual amount of time, but just say that that's the case. It might simply be, hey, look, I want you to swap drivers between jobs so that, one of you can literally just sit and not have to pay attention to the road. You can have a drink, a bite to eat, and just completely tune out for that time, and then swap when you have to transfer to the next job. So you can make really practical adjustments, particularly when there's more than one person working together. But if it is one person working on their own for the whole day, you also want I guess the employer, put yourself in that employee's shoes. Particularly on hot, hard days when they are probably going to need to drink more water than they normally would, and it's about going, well, what would I expect if it were my son or my daughter or my child? How would I want them to be treated as well?
Yeah, it's difficult to be fair when you're a new employer because you expect your employees to do everything, but to sit down and go, okay, well, how should I treat them respectfully? And if it was me being in that position, would I be happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. It's interesting because, talking about those expectations, the other thing I was going to suggest too is in regard to making sure that you've got, I guess, simple but effective policies. And I'm definitely not talking about where you have a handbook of 50, 60 pages that as a small business you've got to sit down and create this thing and it's going to take you a month of Sundays to do. But it's about just having really clear, simple one-page documents that are well written, that prevent confusion around what you will and won't accept for certain things, and that they protect your business, but they also create a healthy, fair work environment. So it could be about breaks. It could be about your vehicle policy. This is one I often find small businesses have an issue with, particularly when they've got a vehicle that they're providing to an employee, because what happens if they get a parking fine or they get a speeding fine, or if the vehicle's dented, or there's rubbish left through the vehicle because they've had a break and they've left you know,
or they smoke in the vehicle.
Or they smoke in the vehicle. Yeah, yeah. And so again, this is where setting those clear expectations through maybe just a one-page policy to go, hey, look, you know, getting this vehicle's a privilege. This is how we want you to treat it. This is our expectations. Here's what happens with fines. Here's what happens with, you know, if the vehicle's dirty, you know, that kind of stuff.
So some lawn care businesses will have two functions here. They'll have an employee handbook, and then they'll have standard operating procedures that cover all of the
safety aspects. Yeah,
all of the potential things the employee might do.
yeah, all those little jobs. Yeah, and you can roll those into one. Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, the other thing, I guess, is that you might even want to have some basic stuff around, for instance, leave entitlements. And I'm not talking about how you get 4 weeks if you're a full-time employee and you get sick leave and whatever, but it's more around what do you expect if employees are sick? You know, will you accept a text message or do you want a phone call? You know, do you accept that you know, if they tell you 5 minutes before the shift starts, do you want them to potentially tell you at least 2 hours before the shift starts?
I've had this come up for myself, and it's when you go to the Landscaping and Gardening Award for Australia, there's no clear answers on some of these things. It is, like you say, there's clearly spelt out how much leave somebody can be entitled to, but
that's right.
Not how you actually deal with it first, face-to-face.
No, exactly. And these awards are complex, right? They're large documents that give all of the employee entitlements, but yet quite often don't tell you about the practical way to go about it. So that's why I'm suggesting having a one-pager on, hey, look, here's my expectation. No problem if you send me a text, but I want a follow-up call afterwards. You know, you've got to let me know how long you expect to be off work so that if I know that, you know, you're potentially going to be 2 days, I know I've got to, you know, cover the jobs for tomorrow as well as today. And it's also, you know, if you've been employed for you know, a number of months and they've got some accrual for annual leave and they decide that they want to utilise that annual leave, as a small business, you might say, hey, look, all good, I just need you to give me at least 4 weeks notice before you take that annual leave. They're all the kind of things that, as you say, they're not in the award, but you can actually make your own policy on it.
So I've seen annual leave come up in two ways that can be a little bit confronting and grating on people's attitudes in our industry because it's seasonal.
Yeah.
So I don't want you taking leave at Christmas time because that's when we're busy. But you've got to be compassionate to your employees. So do you shut down and force everyone to have a week off between Christmas and New Year's?
Yeah.
And then force everyone to have the other 3 weeks of their leave off in winter time when there's less work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where your leave policy can help. But these are the decisions that small businesses have to make, right? And they're tough. So having it on paper really helps you decide before you actually get to that time period what you do want to do, but lets your employees know what you're expecting as well. So you can define periods where it's unlikely that you will accept leave. So you can say, hey, look, these months are very difficult for us to approve leave.
Yeah.
You can also, within your policy, say, hey, look, we'll only, depending on the size of your business and how many employees you've got, but you might say, look, we'll only allow one person to be on leave at any given time. And we're talking about planned annual leave. I mean, sick leave's different.
Yes.
We can't plan for that, right? So,
I myself and the majority of people who would classify as self-employed and putting on 1 or 2 employees will usually put on a casual, which means unpaid leave, but they get a higher pay rate to make up for it. So it is what it is. For the first time in 15 years, I've now got a permanent employee, which means I've had to start dealing with all of those leave issues and how do we deal with leave and how do we communicate leave. And I've seen a range of ways people deal with this, from like myself, single employee or 1 or 2 employees, through to a business that has sort of 6 to 20 employees where it's still a small business. So there's a lot of rigidity around who can take leave and when, through to large companies, which it's just a case of going, okay, we still have preferences about what you can do, but employees largely have the rights when it comes to a large company. And I think Fair Work Australia push pretty hard on that.
They do. Yeah, they absolutely do. And look, you make a really good point in regard to casuals, because that's generally the way that most small businesses start off, because they're testing the waters. And oftentimes we're like, oh, let's just give this a go before we create permanent employment contracts here. So, yeah, absolutely having people on board as casuals can really help.
Yeah.
Now, there's still legislation around casuals for leave as well. So things like compassionate leave, jury leave, you've got also domestic violence leave. I mean, casuals, whilst they don't get paid for the leave, they're still entitled to that leave. And they're also entitled to let an employer know, hey, look, I'm not going to be available for these periods of time.
Now, you might disagree with me on this, and feel free to correct me, please. But if I'm the employer of one person and that one person is requesting leave and I can't give them leave without it adversely affecting my business, I think that gives a small business more latitude to say, hey, I can't actually work with that in some situations.
Yeah.
Compared to a large employer where Fair Work Australia will be like, hey, you just got to suck it up and deal with it. But I think the smaller an employer, the more leeway they're given, more latitude they are given to be able to deal with situations which would potentially sink a business.
I completely agree with you. And that goes for all sorts of conditions for employment. Like even if you've got one permanent employee and they might be, requesting flexible work because they're able to do that under the Fair Work legislation now, you can actually go back and say, look, I'm just not able to accommodate that because of the type of business that I have. So as long as you're doing it in the formal method that the Fair Work Act requires it, you absolutely can say no. And you don't want your business to falter or to be adversely affected by trying to accommodate every request that you have. It's just simply not possible some of the time. So, it's about what can I accommodate and what can I just not accommodate. And what I always recommend to people when it comes to leave is that if there's a period that your employee's requested to go on leave and it just simply doesn't suit, you just try and negotiate. You literally just say, hey, these are the reasons why it doesn't suit. It's going to really have a significant impact. I want you to have the leave. I'd love you to be able to go take a break. Let's see if we can agree on an alternate time.
Efficiency is the thing that rules a business and the decisions you make as a small business owner. Right Mowers give you the options in their product lineup to match efficiency with size, fuel usage, and the type of jobs you want to target, from catching to mulching or side discharge, from roadside verges to acreages, and manicured lawns to 6 feet tall and super long. I've been using the Right Stander I 42-inch with a Catch Pro for manicured areas and the Stander ZK61 to maximise productivity for large open acreage mowing. If you need to replace your push mower, try the 32-inch Stander B. If you have more open access to residential properties, there's a 42 through to 48-inch option that suits you. And if you want to enter the acreage market, the 52, 61 and 72-inch machines have choices in engine size and model type to suit the work you want it to do. Right Standards go the distance, saving you time and money season after season. One of the things I've seen come up, and I've voiced my opinion on this and then realised, actually, I need to be careful what I say and whether I'm right or not. I think there's two ways to look at this issue, but in terms of casual employees being offered permanent position, and my original thought on this was if you have provided a casual employee with 12 months worth of casual work, you're obliged to provide them with a permanent position.
So the legislation's just recently changed on this, Gary. So the pathway is now different. So the pathway used to be that once an employee had met the entitlement to be offered a permanent position, that the employer had to offer that to the employee.
Yeah.
The pathway's now changed. So since August last year, any new casual employee after August, it's now up to the employee to request conversion from casual to permanent.
So an employer doesn't have to offer it. It's up to the employee to request it.
No. So if the casual was engaged after August of last year,
Yeah.
the employee now requests it. The employer does not have to offer it.
Okay. So the other factor that comes in there is there's two pathways there. One is the pathway which we're talking about where you're providing casual employment for this person, and that's the intention of the position you're offering them. The other one is where you're offering them casual until you feel that they are worthy of being put on permanent. And I think usually that would be considered a trial period. You're casual and, 3 weeks or 3 months later, you'll be made permanent if you are successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I have a view on this one. And that is that the Fair Work Act and the legislation allows us to have a probationary period within employment. So that probationary period can be up to 6 months long.
Wow.
And that's an adequate amount of time to be able to test both skill set and attitude and whether or not the learning on the job, that the person's picking the job up pretty quickly and they're going to fit within your organisation. So you can have a probationary period in a permanent contract. And that probationary period allows you to dismiss the employee within that period if they're not working out. Now, you've still got to follow a fair process that ticks the box for the Fair Work Act. But if you do that accordingly, then that person doesn't have a right to unfair dismissal under the Fair Work legislation. So you've got a safeguard period within a permanent position anyway, or even a permanent part-time position. So a lot of businesses I do hear talk about, oh no, we'll engage them as casual first to see if they work out. And my challenge to that often is, what is it saying to that individual? A lot of the time it's saying, we're not really sure about this and we're not sure if we're going to commit this role longer term. And that may be the case for some employers. It might be, oh, look, this is the first time I've engaged someone. I really don't want to put myself in that position where I'm stepping into the realm of having to start accruing leave and having a notice period if I end up dismissing the person. But you've also got to think about, what does it say to the employee? A lot of the time employees go, well, I'm only casual. Doesn't matter if I don't turn up today. Or, look, I'm going to search for another job, a permanent job, while I've got this job in hand because A, I need the money, but B, we don't often know what people's financial circumstances are. A lot of the time people need a permanent role on the books to be able to apply for car loans, house loans, all that kind of thing. So their preference is to be employed in a permanent nature.
Yeah, and often an employer, particularly my size, is not thinking about the employee's position and whether they appreciate it or whether they find that that's not being treated well.
Yeah.
So I've been through that recently.
Have you?
Yeah, in terms of having an employee on as casual because that's what I wanted, and then going, okay, I am providing them with long-term casual work that is consistent. So they were employed before August last year, which means as far as legislation goes, I was still obliged to give them the offer.
Yes. Yeah.
But at that point in time, it was literally a case of dealing with all of those issues around, well, are they getting enough from me that they don't want to go looking for work elsewhere?
Yeah.
How many hours should I give them to look after them? Can I provide that for them? Yeah. So all those questions had to come up and be answered so that we were both happy.
And look, literally a lot of smaller businesses do start off with casual, and for them it's not so much about testing should this position be permanent or should it be casual, but do I have enough work to be able to sustain this person? And, a lot of the time once you get to a point where you go, oh, goodness, yeah, I absolutely can sustain the work. And, you know, I'm now providing regular hours on a consistent basis, week in, week out. And, you know, this person's now got an ongoing expectation of future work. That's really the test under the Act is it ongoing? Is it systematic? And do they have an ongoing expectation? So, you know, you might come to a point where it's like, yep, and you might engage or you might make an offer to convert to permanent before the required kind of date that you're meant to under the legislation. And that's all well and good. The interesting thing is quite often we find that casual workers don't want to convert because they get really used to having that extra 25% casual loading coming in, and they don't see that having, you know, accrued annual leave and accrued sick leave and then a notice period paid if they are terminated as a benefit to them. They'd actually prefer more money in the hand rather than those other entitlements.
Yeah, I think that is fair, and it's a difficult one for people to get their head around because it should equate to the same thing at the end of the day, whether you're getting paid the 25% loading or whether you are taking leave. And I think one of the things when you look at the award is you don't see the words sick leave in the award. You see the words compassionate leave, family leave.
Personal and carers leave. Yeah.
And that puts it in a different perspective. I confronted my mum when I was young. She wanted to take some sick leave when she wasn't sick. And I was like, that's not what it's for, Mum.
Mum, what are you doing?
And now I'm looking at the legislation and I'm going, there is no obligation there for my employee to tell me if they're sick or not. They can just say, I wish to take a day of compassionate leave, family leave, personal carers leave.
So interesting, though, because there is a requirement for them to provide substantial evidence if you request it. So now casual's different, right? Because casual can just say, look, I'm not available to work today. But when you've got a permanent employee and they've got an entitlement to personal and carers leave, full-time employee gets 10 days per year. If they are taking that leave, you are well within your right as an employer to request for evidence that they were actually sick or a dependent that they're caring for is sick in order for you to pay out that leave. Yeah.
And I know most employers, small employers probably are quite shonky around how they handle this, but most employers will go, okay, I'm not going to ask for evidence unless you're taking consistently Mondays and Fridays.
Correct. And that's what I would usually say to people is that you've got to establish a level of trust, right? And so typically most employees will do the right thing by you, particularly if you've hired right to start with, right, around attitude.
Correct.
So a lot of the time, you know, they will only take it when it's required. But if you're starting to get into this pattern of it's happening near public holidays, it's happening adjacent to their annual leave, it's happening, you know, as you said, on Mondays and Fridays, you just got to keep those kind of notes and records. And you basically just say, hey, look, and this is where courageous conversations got to happen early. You know, this is another thing I have small businesses come to me a lot and go, oh, gosh, this is happening and I don't know what to do. Well, how long's it been going on? Oh, 6 to 8 months. Right. Deal with it straight away when you notice or identify the issue, and it's so much easier to manage. But as soon as you've identified a trend in terms of Monday or Friday, or adjacent to public holidays or annual leave, I'd absolutely be asking and I'd just be saying, hey, look, I've noticed a pattern here. Next time you take or that you need a day either side of a weekend, I'm going to ask that you get a medical certificate because I need to, you know that, you know, this is justifiable. You got to choose the words right and the language that's right for that particular individual, but you absolutely can request it.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. So we're talking at the moment about effective HR policies, correct?
We got off track, didn't we?
Well, I was just looking at that. I was going, this is sort of where we're up to. We're talking about HR policies, and I think that they're still part of that, definitely, right? That's all part of
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, and this comes back to, I was talking about a basic leave policy, right? And in that,
Yeah.
you might just have a number of different bullet points, and it's, you've got to notify 2 hours before shift if you can't work, or you've got to, if you send me a text message, you've got to follow up with a phone call later. You've got to let me know how long you're likely to be off. It could be that you need to provide a certificate if it's more than 2 days, or if it's a Monday or a Friday. So you can stipulate that stuff in that one-page policy right up front.
Yeah, and I've erred on the side of building trust rather than undermining trust when it comes to this. But
yeah, totally.
without having it in writing, it is a case of going, okay, and then if I go back and make a change, it does suggest that trust has been betrayed.
It does. It does. Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably, Gary, to the next point that I wanted to talk about, which was really around, creating that strong company culture and trying to do it early. And, creating company culture is not just for big business. It's absolutely, I believe, important, even if you've got one employee who's a casual, because I think it does set the bar again in terms of, how you're going to interact with each other, how you're going to interact with your customers, how the work gets done. And that a lot of the time is about then how your customers see your business and see your brand. And, if you've got that strong culture, then that's going to, boost that person's enjoyment for their role. They want to be there. They're productive. You retain them. And, if you've got a business that quite often relies on word of mouth referrals or repeat business, and you've got people that really take pride in their work because you've set a good culture, then you're going to get repeat business, right?
Yeah. So this is really important because when you listen to podcasts, a lot of what you hear is company culture is about meditating in the corner, having offices without walls, and all these airy-fairy policies that when it comes to running a lawn care and gardening and landscaping business, it's like, how does that work? So what you were saying is stick to those core principles of what do I want my company to be recognised by? What do I want my customers to see?
Absolutely.
And,
and we're not talking about having, trust, integrity, respect, written up on your wall as you come into, where you keep your gear and that kind of thing. We're talking about the basics of, hey, what's really important to me for my business is that we absolutely respect the customer. Yeah. What does that mean? Okay, we be polite, we be courteous, we clean up for them, we finish our jobs efficiently. If they've got an additional request, how do you want me to deal with that?
How do we make the customer feel like they're always right, even when they're not?
Yeah. Well, that can go too far sometimes too, I think. But
yes.
but it's those kind of things, right? It's like, how do you? And each business might be a little bit different. Some businesses might absolutely go, look, because of the size of the job that we're doing and the kind of work that we're doing, we're going to bend over backwards. So if the customer wants a change last minute, well, let's see if we can accommodate that. Whereas if you're doing a smaller job that it's an hour backyard cleanup, you might go, well, no, we still respect the customer, but we're not actually going to, take any out of scope work. We've got to stick to our hour. So, it's about those kind of things as you go. But, you might also have a piece around culture, around teamwork. I mentioned to you before around, if you've got more than one employee or you're working with that employee, it's about, well, look, I expect that we're going to help each other finish jobs efficiently. That just because you've finished your bit, you don't just stand there and watch me finish my bit. If you can help me start to pack up or, maintain the equipment or, load it onto the vehicle, whatever the case may be.
A lot of this comes down to how you treat people, right? Are you being part of the team? Are you being respectful of other people's time? Are you doing the right thing? Are you aware of what's going on around you?
Yeah, that's right.
I've seen this situation come up recently in my business, but also in other places when we talk about people who are neurodivergent and they really struggle with understanding clear expectations, boundaries, and communication in social situations.
Yes.
So I find that particularly, and I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I know that a lot of people who are self-employed, or they are what I call a technician,
Yep.
really good at their skill in life, they're probably pretty narrow-minded and a little bit rigid thinking. So
Mm-hmm.
me, myself, can be a little bit hard to make sure we get all of those things right. So I'm starting to think about that going, okay, how do I help my employees to think about how far do I stand from the customer when I'm speaking to them? How do I make sure I respect the customer even if they are a little bit cranky?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's even the basics, I guess, is if the customer's home when you go to do the job, do you expect that if they're inside, that there's a polite knock on the door to say, hey, I'm finished, we're heading off now? Or do you want them just to exit?
It's also, this is slightly funny, but it's really important to let the customer know before you start too, because the amount of stories I've heard of customers being in the backyard naked or having their clothes on the line and whatever, you can imagine where that
in
goes.
the
It's
swimming
just,
pool or, yeah.
offering the customer the satisfaction that their privacy is valued.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So I think all of those little things and those conversations are important because that's what helps you set your culture.
Yeah.
But what also helps you really embed that culture is that you recognize when people have done what you want them to do. Particularly for new employees and whether it's the neurodiverse employees that you're talking about, you go, hey, well done with that. I just saw how you managed that conversation. That was great.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I expect. And that gives them motivation to go, right, I know I'm on the right path. I'm going to do that again. So you get this repeat awesome performance, those pats on the back. It could be shout them a coffee at the end of the day because they've done something great.
Outside of the employer-employee relationship, there is a lot to be said for neurodivergent people being insecure in not knowing how to handle those situations. So the more you can affirm them,
positive reinforcement,
and point out little truths that help them both directions. Like this is good, that's not so good, or this is good, that's really bad. Think about how you do these. This is what we want to aim for, or steer away from that.
Exactly.
It's helpful. And whether they're neurodivergent
really
or not, it's still helpful.
It's still helpful because it helps reaffirm your culture. And I think the key thing here is really about open communication. You've got to be really explicit with the little things that you wouldn't even think to do when you're working on your own. You'd never think, oh, gee, pat myself on the back for doing that. I did that great. I did that not so great, But you've got to communicate those things when you have employees.
Well, this is the thing. A lot of the time, the business owner will struggle with, am I doing the right thing myself? So trying to get to the point where they go, okay, this is really important for my business. Now I need to think about how I make sure my employees are doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. But it's all the little things. It could be about the maintenance of your equipment. It could be about the way that they keep the vehicle, about how they talk to the client, about how the quality of the job that they've just done. But I always recommend with culture, you've got to look out for the good stuff and reward the good stuff. It's not just about, a slap on the wrist when things go bad. Yes, you have to do that. But to establish a good culture, you've got to try and point out all the good stuff that's happening and reward and recognize that to keep it going and to keep the motivation high to do it again.
It's amazing when you deal with a lot of people, how quickly you see some people are really mindful of cleaning the tools after they use them, and other people are completely absent when it comes to that. And it's not that you've picked the wrong person. It's just that people are different.
And maybe do they understand the importance of it? Do they understand the why?
Yeah, so a quick explanation of this is why we do this.
Yeah.
This is our standard operating procedure.
That's right. Yeah. And look, sometimes I know, particularly when you've got a small business as well, you're really very conscious about any spend. And, if you've got to take a chainsaw in because its teeth are, wearing too quickly or it's broken down or, God forbid, someone's put the wrong fuel in it, right? It's all those little things that as an employee, the employee's like, oh, I stuffed up. the employer's like, here's the cost of that mistake. And so if you can really explain in the why, sometimes around the financials to it as well, it can help people understand the impact that it has.
Yeah. I've had an employee break a rake. So I'll try and say that fast, break a rake. And
careful.
he bought a new rake and brought it in. He's like, I broke the old rake. Here's a new one. And I said to him, there was no expectation of you to buy a new rake. You've learnt the lesson. Try not to break a rake.
And here, have this one back. Yeah.
So,
great.
within reason, tool breakage is not the employee's responsibility to pay for because they're an employee, not a business.
It's not, but this is also why it's so important to train, set expectations, reward when things go well, right? So, yeah.
Exactly. So, I think looking at my industry, there's a huge difference, and you'll have people who, the majority of people will be a technician. So they will go, okay, I want to have an offsider or a helper. They don't refer to them as an employee. So really teaching them what you're saying at the moment is learning how to just communicate regularly and effectively with your employees compared to somebody who's aiming for having 10 to 50 or 150 employees where they need to have a HR person that's responsible for handling the whole process. But either way, the same approach is all about having the company culture set early.
Yeah. And look, I think that, it seems like a lot of time that you're investing up front when a new person starts, and it absolutely is. But that will absolutely pay off in the long run. It really will. It's so the cost of having to re-engage is something like 7-to-1 in terms of direct cost to indirect. So every time you have to potentially terminate or let someone go, it's costing you 7 times more than the indirect costs of that person to actually engage someone else in lost time, because you've got to do the onboarding again, the whole training, the setting the expectations. So if you can really invest that time up front and have that person stay on and be great because you've really put that time into them, then it's definitely worth it.
So it's 7 times the cost if you get it wrong, and you've got to dismiss them, find a new person, deal with all of that, deal with a business that's got surplus of load and a lack of labour.
Yeah, and look, there's other statistics that go around, but some people say it's even it costs you 2 to 3 times the employee's wage if you're having to get rid of someone and bring someone on board again. So it's an expensive thing to do. You want to get it right.
That makes it inefficient to have employees.
Makes it efficient if you get good ones and you train them well.
I talk about numbers here for what it is worth to have an employee. If you're doing the job yourself, you're going to absorb a lot of the costs of a job in your own labour. So most people won't think about the fact that they need to pay a wage and then have profit afterwards. They just go, oh, my wage is my profit, and I'll give you an elderly discount, a pensioner's discount, whatever. And then they end up working for next to nothing because there's no money in it when they don't know how to run that side of their business. For an employee, the numbers I have been spouting is around 3 times the cost of the employee is what you need to be charging out the employee to cover their costs. So
that would make a lot of sense.
If you have to dismiss an employee and put a new one on, then all of that time that you're retraining and dealing with all of those issues is a zero sum.
Yeah. Negligible. Yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
You're not doing business. You are just doing recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And causing yourself a lot of stress along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Clint Adams that I spoke to last week said for his business, it's 4 times the cost of the employee is what they need to be charging the employees.
Charging out.
Right out, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Wow.
So, so there's some real numbers, made up or not.
Hey, they sound good.
Yeah. For sure. And I think the next topic you wanted to talk about.
It gives businesses a good model to work from, though, doesn't it? And really gets them to start to think about, well, am I paying myself enough? Let alone, am I charging am I charging out at the right rate?
See, this is why I'm doing this podcast, because I can learn from my own mistakes, but everybody who listens to my podcast is now armed with information that they can then go, okay, what do I need in order to run my business successfully?
Yeah, great.
So, yeah, hopefully we get some listeners.
Yes.
No, I've been doing it for over 3 years. I'm getting listeners.
Yeah, got good content, yeah.
Yeah. Are you thinking of leaving your job to start a profitable and enjoyable lawn and garden business? Aussie Lawn Stars shares stories, lessons, and advice to help you grow a healthy, productive, efficient, and sustainable business. Got questions or want more information? Contact Aussie Lawn Stars at iCloud.com or reach out to Gary Ashton on Facebook or Messenger for personal help. But beware, your question may end up in a podcast episode. For business coaching that ensures the right mindset and decision-making approach, check out Think Tank Coaching. Their website is https://thinktankcoaching.com.au. They've been instrumental in helping me and can guide you towards achieving your business goals. You can also email them at thinktankcoaching@outlook.com. But the next topic you wanted to touch on follows on very closely from having good culture, because if you are not careful, you're going to run into issues with being compliant when it comes to employment laws. So stay on top of your company culture, nail it and do it right, and then you are unlikely to need to worry about your compliance.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously no one wants to do anything that's illegal. When it comes to employment laws, you can end up with costly fines. You can end up with reputational damage, lawsuits, all kinds of stuff. So it really is about knowing what you need to comply with. And Gary, you mentioned it before, you've got to know your award. So the Gardening and Landscaping Services Award is the thing that sets the minimum standards and rates of pay, minimum conditions for employees within the gardening and landscaping industry. So it's really about knowing what the minimum wage and overtime and all of that kind of thing is, penalty rates within that award. A lot of businesses choose to pay employees a flat rate, just to say, look, I'm not going to worry about whether it's work on the weekend or weekdays, or whether it's before 6 o'clock in the morning, or, if it's an hour of overtime here or whatever. I'm just going to pay you a higher amount, and I'm going to pay you a flat amount. Yeah. That's all well and good, and you can do that, but you've just got to make sure that it meets the better off overall test, in that if you were to apply the terms and conditions that are in the award to the hours that the employee's done, would you as the employer still be paying them better off than if they were engaged strictly under the award conditions? Yeah.
And I think in the industry, most people are not going to vary their hours enough to be outside of that, so not starting before 6 a.m. in the morning. There will be quite a few that work weekends, so they need to be very mindful of weekend rates.
Penalty rates, I
think there are some industries where casuals don't get weekend rates or different rates, right? Because
there
of
are
hospitality industries, etc.
Restaurant industry,
But in the Gardening and Landscaping Award, definitely there are penalties. You need to know what they are.
Absolutely. So know your award. Know what you have to pay people as a minimum if you engage them on a weekend versus on a weekday. It's also, I think, depending on whether you're engaging a casual or a permanent employee, know that you've got to give a percentage casual loading.
Yes.
If you're paying just the award rate, know that most awards also have, if they're permanent, that they also have annual leave loading, all those kinds of things. And the award system in Australia is really quite complex. These are big documents that have lots of clauses in them, and it's important to know what it is that you need to comply with. So definitely definitely look into those. I mean, I always encourage people that if your business can afford it, and this will go back to your point, Gary, in terms of how much are you charging your client. But I would always say you want to attract and retain the right people. And usually you're going to have to pay more than the minimum award condition to do that.
Yep.
So you might start out, as you said before, if you're wanting to test someone out, you might start with the minimum, absolute bare minimum compared to the award. But over time, if they're proving themselves as a really reliable, valuable, great employee, then you might want to, kick in a little bit more than what the minimum conditions in the award are to really, show them that you value them, keep them motivated, keep them going.
Yeah, and this topic comes up a lot in the forums for lawn care. There's a Facebook group or a couple of Facebook groups for lawn care industry in Australia, and the topic of how to pay the employees, most people say pay above the award. I actually say no, pay them the bare minimum on the award and then use the incentive of performance to increase. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the award, you've got 5 levels. You've got your first level is your probation,
entry
and
level.
then you've got level 1 through to 5. Yep. So I would argue that somebody's entitled to the base rate, the after probation level 1, if they are suitably qualified and demonstrated that they are capable of and they are actually doing the things required for level 5, they're entitled to level 5. Most employees can go level 3 unless they've done a trade, an apprenticeship or a traineeship.
Some kind of qualification,
They go to level 3 without a problem. So I've said to people, pay them at the award, level 3, higher if necessary, but then add a performance factor in. So work out some KPIs and okay, if they are performing above award, they get paid above award. If they're not performing above award, they don't get paid above award. And that performance can
love that
change.
system. I love that system. And it does change because if they have a slump in performance, then they don't get those incentives. I think the other thing too is that you've got potentially 2 employees that are doing the same job and you're paying them both at level 3, but you might reward one person much more than the other one just because of the difference in performance again. So it'll allow I do absolutely agree with that system for sure.
Now, the other thing there is transparency around this, because if a lot of employers discourage employees talking about their pay rates, make it an offence. You'll get fired if you talk about it.
So that's actually now against the law. There was legislation that came in, it would have been in 2022, and it was around the pay secrecy. And it's no longer allowable to expect or request that employees do not share their financial or their earnings with other employees.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. And a lot of employers have got a clause to that effect in their employment contracts. That clause is no longer it's basically a void clause now. So the clause can still sit within the contract, but it has no effect.
Well, it's almost illegal.
Yeah.
But I think the other aspect there is around the performance, and regardless of what the law says, if you say to your employees, your performance bonus is between you and me, that is different to what they're getting paid. But do you want them to be silent when they get performance bonus, or do you want everybody to go, oh, that's good, I want that too?
Do you want some healthy competition going on? Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in encouraging employees to compete with each other in that regard.
Yeah, look, I've even seen small employers basically have a system, on the fridge in the room where they all go and have, lunch together. They're different to a circumstance where you're out on the road, obviously, in lawn care business. But, they've basically got a green and red. How did this person go on these jobs this week? Colour in red, colour in green. You can see who's performing, who's not. Yeah.
The argument I've had come up when talking to people about this, the performance side of things, is that it can be incredibly top heavy. It can be really like for a small business with up to 6 employees, it can be quite time consuming for the owner of the business.
Absolutely can be, yeah.
And I think when you go from 1 to 6 employees, the owner of the business holds every title in the business. Once you get to about 4 to 6 employees, the owner of the business will start paying somebody like yourself to come in and operate either all of administrative duties or HR specific duties or whatever it might be. And that's where that changes a lot. But it's a lot of pressure on a business owner initially to juggle all of those balls.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, when you think about how many balls there are, there's marketing, there's finance, there's HR, and quite often to start with, you're trying to be the expert in all of those yourself. Because you just literally at that point, you can't afford to engage someone to do all those little roles for you. So you're just making do.
So if you have performance KPI and you're trying to micromanage your employees with their performance KPI, it could be really intensive in your time. But there are systems around that help that process to make it easier. So some of them are software systems, and sometimes it might be something you can learn from seeking a little advice from a HR firm like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think that the trick that I always tell people is pick something that's absolutely relative to what you think is doing a good job in your business. You don't want to have a KPI that's unrelevant to what the focus needs to be for that employee. So you've got to have it relevant, but you've got to have it something that is easily able to be you're able to pull data on it if it's a quantifiable KPI.
I guess the other side of that is employees are really good at gaming the system. When they know there's a KPI there, they'll be like, oh, how do I check this box with doing as little as possible?
Yeah, particularly if it's if there's a monetary incentive for it, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, look, I've a couple of businesses that I work with at the moment. We actually establish the KPIs with the employees. So I'll work with the manager of the business to draft what we think are good KPIs, but then we'll put it to the employees to go, hey, well, what do you think about these? Because then it gives some buy-in, gives some input, and they've got skin in the game.
Yeah.
So, rather than it being just a put to say, hey, here's your KPIs, go for it.
Yeah.
Because then the targets within them, that you haven't set them way too high that they're not even going to bother trying, or so low that they're going to get the payment for it just by turning up.
That sounds like a lot of what we've been talking about throughout this entire interview. It's about clearly communicating with the employees and clear communication in both directions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, spot on. So the last topic, Gary, that I was keen on, it was so closely related to what we were just talking about, I guess, in regard to the being compliant with the employment laws and knowing the award, and that's to make sure that you've got a clear employment contract. So even if you're engaging someone as a casual employee, have an employment contract.
So a handshake's not good enough?
Well, no, I wouldn't expect that it sets expectations clearly enough, and you don't have that handshake to be able to come back to say, but we agreed on. Oh, did we? Did we? Oh, was that what that was? I didn't think that was the case. So handshake's probably not quite enough.
So can people just type into Google employment contract, copy and paste, or do you recommend a little bit more than that?
So I wouldn't go to Google and just do a random search. I would suggest people start with the Fair Work website. The Fair Work website's actually got some amazing resources for small business. It really does. So there's actually templates in there for employment contracts. Now, they will give you a start. But if you want to make sure that you've got it right and you've got the right award in there, that you've got the right award rate, that you're doing the right thing with overtime and the like, you may want to get, professional support, either someone in HR. I find a lot of people actually go to a lawyer, and I think, oh, wow, the amount that they spend by getting a lawyer to write a contract is just phenomenal. You don't need a lawyer to write your employment contracts.
I've talked to a lawyer about doing some contracts for me, not necessarily employment contracts, but doing contracts for different things. And I think the starting price is probably around $1,500 for a fairly basic contract to be written up by a lawyer. So I can imagine an employment contract is not likely to be in that budget. It's probably going to be more. Potentially.
Yeah. So, there's a couple of different avenues that you've got. If you do have a good understanding of the legislation and your award and you feel like you can go for it and you just need some guidance, then jump on the Fair Work website, absolutely, because there's a template there that you can start with. Otherwise, reach out to, a HR consultant and get some support to write it. But you really want to make sure that you've got enough in there that helps any future avoidance of misunderstanding. You absolutely want to make sure that you've got stuff in there around, well, what is your pay rate if you work Monday to Friday versus what's your pay rate if you work a Saturday or a Sunday? What do we do about overtime? It could be around I'm just thinking there's so many things that you can put in there. You might have employees that have a really good understanding of your charge out rates, and you don't want them to provide that information to anyone else. So you might want to have an intellectual property and confidentiality clause in your agreement.
Yep.
But you might even want to have some stuff in there around how much notice to give if they resign. This is a common one that I hear about, is people call me and say, hey, my employee only gave me 1 day notice. They're a permanent employee. Aren't they meant to give 2? And it's like, well, yeah, do you have an employment contract with them? Have you let them know what award they're under? Well, no. Okay, so you haven't set the expectation up front. Yeah. So all of those kind of things can really, really help. And it absolutely means that you're less likely to have disputes later on, because you've got a written document that you can refer back to go, oh, no, here's what we agreed to.
So can we give your business a plug for that? Is that something you're happy to do if people are looking for help?
Absolutely happy for you to give my business a plug. And, look, that's the stuff I love helping with, right, is just get your basics right.
So how should people contact you in relation to questions they have around legislation, getting contracts sorted out, or getting some advice?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can provide you my contact details, but I'm the kind of person, just give me a call. Pick up the phone and literally call me and we can have a discussion. And I always let people know, hey, look, am I the right person to help you based on what you need, or is there someone else I'd recommend for you to talk to? But, phone call's the best way.
Yeah, okay. So where can people contact you?
Yep, so they can get me on 0447 126 799. But I'm also found on the website, so people can look me up. My business is called People and Capability. Yeah. And there's a good explanation as to all the work I do on that website.
So People and Capability. And is that a .com.au?
That's a .com.au, and capabilities with a K.
Okay, there we go. We'll put it in the show notes for people to look it up there as well, because people always need to be able to find it somewhere.
Yeah, fantastic. That sounds great.
Yeah. Well, Kim, it's been great getting you in today. I've learnt some things myself. It's been a great discussion, and certainly gives the listeners a lot of thoughts on what they can do to improve their experience with employing people.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much for having me, Gary. Good to talk to you.
The biggest thing I see is getting people over the hurdle of being scared of going from self-employed to being a manager of different aspects of a business. And that employing people is one of those hardest aspects for them to get their head around. So,
absolutely. And look, even if this is the kind of stuff, I mean, just an hour's kind of conversation just to give some coaching and some advice and to ask some pertinent questions to people to go, well, how do you want to manage this in your business? How do you want to manage this? And every business owner is a little bit different in terms of what they might want, but it's about getting clarity on how you want to engage and what what kind of workers you are looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Kim, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person. It's taken a lot of effort to get this, but it's been very valuable.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Gary.
Hey, you. Yes, you with the moist grass on your bare legs. This is a new year and a new podcast. I'm asking you to join me in some changes made just for you. I want listeners to join the new Facebook group for Aussie Lawn Stars, so you can give me feedback on existing episodes and content ideas for more episodes. But more importantly, it's a place you can ask questions. The simple questions may get answered by members in the group already, much like you would find in any community group. But the questions will fuel and feed future episodes. More importantly, if you ask a question in the group or on the YouTube comments section, you may get sucked into the dungeon where your question and you become a feature episode. In short, join Aussie Lawn Stars on Facebook, YouTube and Instagram to participate and engage with me directly and other listeners who want to help or be helped.
Thank you for listening to Aussie Lawn Stars. Please remember to rate and review the show on the Apple Podcasts app or the player you use. Exciting new shows are released every Monday. Make sure you follow or subscribe to hear the next episode.